So my name is Dan May. I'm the commercial director here at Ramsac, and I'm joined today by my colleague Adil Hussain, who's spotlighted, so you should be able to see him. Adil is our senior SharePoint consultant here at Ramsac. And today's webinar is about sort of getting the best out of SharePoint. So we know that over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, there's been a real significant move to SharePoint, really escalated by COVID, where there was a real push to get people working more flexibly and working with file access remotely. And as that drive for 365 has meant that most people are using some kind of 365 licensing, when people have then gone to look at storing files in the cloud, SharePoint's been the obvious starting point. So we know that lots of people have moved to SharePoint. Some people that we've worked with have done that as a really thoroughly planned project. So we know that where people have sometimes moved quite quickly into SharePoint, there was a bit of a run of what we call kind of lift and shift migrations, where literally files were just picked up from what was an on-premises server and they were dropped into SharePoint, and SharePoint is just being used as a great big library of files. And whilst that might have worked to start with, we also know that as time has gone on, that kind of lift and shift approach to using SharePoint has caused all kinds of errors and all kinds of limitations and all kinds of frustrations with speed of access, etc., etc. But what we're going to try and do in about 45 minutes is give you a view of the things that we've seen that have been common problems that have caused frustrations for end users. So, as I mentioned, really delighted today to be joined by Adil Hussain. He's our lead SharePoint consultant. Morning, Adil.
Morning.
So Adil, you've been with Ramsac for a couple of years now, and the first project that we gave you was, the toughest client of the lot. We gave you Ramsac as your first client, didn't we? And just to go back sort of a couple of years, we were using a SharePoint site already. We'd already sort of turned off file servers, so we were kind of one step into the journey already, but we wanted to expand our use of SharePoint and use it not just for file storage, but really as our, well, we call it the hub, don't we? Or
yeah.
You called it the hub. So we wanted to use it as our sort of our communication hub and I think it's fair to say it's become, the main source of information for everybody internally in the organization. So because you built the hub for us, the Ramsac SharePoint site, I know you're going to use that as kind of your visualizer for today. That's right, isn't it? So we're
showcase.
It's your showcase project, absolutely. So I got some questions for you. Some of the questions that I've written and some that a few people on the call have submitted before the call. So I've got some questions, and we're going to go through sort of 4 or 5 key areas I know that you're really passionate about in terms of the problems that you come across when customers call you in to look at problematic SharePoint sites. Is that fair? That's what we're going to do, I think.
Yeah.
Now, you're a techie, and I know you're going to use a bit of jargon, so we're going to start off with a bit of a jargon buster, right? So we'll send this out afterwards in the recording as well, but I know these terms are going to come up as we talk through what we're going to talk through in the next sort of 45 minutes to an hour. So I'm going to ask you, Adil, gun to your head, 30-second definition of what we mean by some key phrases. So we're going to talk probably about the tenant. What do we mean when we talk about a 365 tenant?
So 365 tenant is basically it's the umbrella for everything. So the best analogy I can give for it is it's your house.
Okay.
So I would say the tenant is the house in terms of SharePoint. So that's number one. I know you're going to ask me the next one, so I'll just stop there at that
so
one.
So it's that sort of like, so in our case, it's that sort of ramsac.com bit of our 365. That's yeah. And then we talk in SharePoint a lot about sites.
Now, a site is a bedroom within that house.
Okay. So what does that mean? Well, we're gonna look at some examples, aren't we?
Yeah. So we'll look at some examples of what a SharePoint site looks like. But essentially, a SharePoint site is where you will store your information and where you then can design it to look nice and pretty for your team for collaboration purposes, which we'll obviously show as we go along. But the best analogy is that I use this analogy with all the clients I ever speak to. So tenant is the house, SharePoint site is a bedroom within that house.
And the sub-site?
So okay, now that's where it gets a bit tough.
Is that the ensuite bathroom, maybe?
Probably, yeah, that probably would be. But a sub-site is a site collection that sits underneath a site, if that makes sense. So you've got, your company names, abclimited.sharepoint.com / let's just call the site HR. So it will be a HR site, and then / policies, if that makes sense. So it's a site that sits underneath a site.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, to me anyway. And then we have pages.
Yep. So pages are what you would create on top of a site for information purposes. So again, we'll show a bit of examples of what pages are when we go into a demonstration later on. But pages is what you would create to create your communications out to everyone else.
Excellent. And then the big one, probably document libraries.
So document library, I mean, not to teach anyone how to suck eggs, but it's essentially what it says in the name. Is a library of where all your documents are sitting. It's where you can upload your files into, is where we would also migrate content into from servers, etc. So that's just a quick breakdown of what a document library is.
Thank you. And then the last one before we get into the questions is the SharePoint list.
Yeah, so SharePoint list. So I've noticed this, a lot of people get confused because a document library is also considered a SharePoint list. But the reason why I wanted to talk about a SharePoint list quickly now is just to say a SharePoint list is essentially like a Excel spreadsheet where you can create an online version with tables, columns, etc., and capture different information. And a document library is simply used to store your documents. So SharePoint and Microsoft, they usually say it's the same thing, which confuses a lot of people. So that's why I quickly wanted to say document library is simply for your documents. SharePoint list is basically like an online version of an Excel spreadsheet.
Lovely, thank you. And I said that was my last question, but actually I know you talk about SharePoint. You talk about different types of SharePoint sites that you've built.
Yeah.
You talk about hub sites, communication sites, team sites, and I'm sure that's going to come out of some of your answers. So what do you mean when you talk about those three different things? Or
so it all depends on the structure of what you're trying to do. So a hub site for me should be used for when you're trying to do an intranet style type of setup. A team site is for a departmental site. So for example, a technical department or finance department, etc. This is where you would use a team site as opposed to a hub site, because you really don't want to capture intranety type of stuff in a departmental site. And then communication site is essentially the same as a hub site. It's just that a communication site is the template used to create a hub site. Hub site is the broad term that you use to collate all these things together.
That makes sense to me. So that sort of hub site being like the all company, like the internal website kind of thing, and then you work on team sites to build out a specific set of resources for a specific group of people. Thank you. That's clearer to me now. So let's get into the questions, and we're going to start talking about structure. And I mentioned in my sort of preamble that I know that one of the problems that we get called in to look at a lot is where people have literally just lifted and shifted. They've just dumped a load of files into SharePoint, and they're just using it as really how they used to use their file server that used to sit in their server cabinet, right? So structure of the site is something I know you're really passionate about. So when you're called in to those problematic, like massive one site SharePoint lift and shift type projects, what are the problems that you see, Adil?
So the first thing that I always see is that is what you just said, is one SharePoint site, and there may be an organization that has over 2 or 3 terabytes worth of data. It's all sitting in one place. I look at it and I'm like, yeah, okay, it may have worked just to quickly get you off this server into the cloud, but then the user journey is very, very impacted by that. Users can't find what they need to find efficiently. It breaks down loading times as well. And then the permission structure on top of it is just not great. And I've noticed that this causes a whole host of problems, which I don't want to spoil what we're going to talk about coming up. But then you've got things like, document library view threshold being exceeded, which we will touch on later on. But then there's loads of it opens up a different kind of worms. And I always think, well, why not split it and, create an intranet site, which is the means for your navigation, and then create these departmental sites and split that information out. And for me, that's how a SharePoint structure in its basic form should be. That's the basics of it, not just one site and let's get it all there. And that's where I see if you do it this way, it works much better.
So we've mentioned that your first project was the Ramsac hub. Is it worth just bringing the hub up onto the screen and just explaining? So I know you're really passionate about putting things in, as you say, into structure. So I'll fill while that's loading. There we go. So here's the Ramsac SharePoint site. So this is the homepage that everybody lands on, right, every day. Yep. And so this is our main site. So the company-wide sort of communication tool where we post all of our news. And then do you want to show us an example then of how you've broken that down? So we've got some sites within that, yep, haven't we? So I guess that's going to be like our people hub, right?
Yep. So this is a site within within our whole tenant, and this is our HR site. So this is an example of pretty much what I've just said. So when I joined Ramsac, I remember during my induction, it was like, yep, go to the HR library, all the policies there, have a gander. And I was like, okay. But then I will go there and I'm just like, okay, where's this policy? Where's that policy? Where do I know about my benefits, etc.? And it was a lot of stuff that you couldn't really see. So then what I decided to do was split it. So now we've created this really nice people hub. We've branded it as a people hub site. So I split it. We've put all of our HR information onto this nice hub site, and we've branded it, as you can see, but we're getting to branding as we go along. And just as we scroll down, we've linked our main documents. So again, this is where a lot of people think, well, what SharePoint is just a document repository. It's not, because although these are files, but as you can see, they're not sitting in a boring structure of a document library within a folder. What we've done is we've highlighted our main documents here for ease of access. So we've got our yearbook, our strategy, our handbook for all of our policies, etc., our culture book. And these are the main areas where people like to get into and see. So that's why we've highlighted them straight there. Another thing that we've Oh, sorry, Dan. Did you have a question?
No, I was going to say, so we've got the example there. This is, I mean, this is all talking about structure. So you landed on that sort of homepage. Yeah. You then clicked into the People Hub. So that's effectively a separate site. And am I right in thinking that one of the advantage of this is about that speed of access? Because effectively, people are now working in a completely different part of the intranet. So if one part of our intranet goes slow or goes offline, we haven't lost everything, because they're created as, it's not all files just dumped into one place with, as you mentioned, sort of several terabyte of data. There's lots of terabytes of data in the main Ramsac bit, and then there's other bit in the People Hub, and I know we've got the Marketing Hub and we've got the team sites, and you might just want to click on the Marketing Hub and show that as well. So is that right? This is about managing speed of access as well as being able to create something that's more easily navigatable. I don't think that's a word.
I don't think that's a word, but I think it makes sense. But no, absolutely. And is what you've just said there, and that's a brilliant way to look at it. Actually, I have looked at it that way, but I've never said it. Is that if one area of the SharePoint is impacted by anything and goes offline, other areas are still working. So if our HR site goes down, it won't impact, the technical team, where we've got a technical team site, which I'll show in a second. But it won't impact them because everybody can carry on working there. And it's what you've just said, the speed of access, and it all comes back down to my favorite topic, which is user experience. I think user experience is key when it comes to SharePoint, because a lot of people I speak to, when I hear the negatives about SharePoint, it's all down to the user experience as opposed to the system itself. And I always say, don't blame the system. Let's get it right, and then let's see what happens. But user experience is key in this whole thing.
Now, you very briefly said about SharePoint library views. So some people have just, as we said, downloaded thousands and thousands of documents into one document library. Yeah. And theoretically, that's fine, right? Because we can have 30 million, is it 30 million documents you can have in a document library? Yeah. In reality, what's the problem with just having one big document library? What is the problem that you see on that?
So the biggest problem you have with that is, although you can store 30 million items, which sounds insane, but you can only view 5,000 at a time. So SharePoint has this list view threshold of 5,000. If it exceeds that, it breaks it. You can't then open a document. You can't see any documents, etc. So this is where it's a simple thing, right? Right at the start of the project, when you're thinking, we want to move from the server, get that structure right of moving everything into its rightful place. So I've brought up the technical team site. This is our department site, by the way. So this was what I mentioned before. This is a room within the house. And again, as you can see, it's a nice nice little layout. And this is also used for induction purposes as well, just to give somebody a breakdown of who the team are, who's in the team, what's the hierarchy, etc. But I won't go into too much into that today. And then, yeah, so if I just click on technical team documents, actually, I'll show it this way. It'll make more sense. So if I go into the site contents, as you can see, there's only 201 items. Now, what does that mean? That means that a part of the whole thing, this was only a small chunk, which this is why you should split it, because it was a small chunk, put it away. If I had an example where it was a bigger chunk, it would have been better as well. But that's the point. It adds to the 5,000 number, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why if you split them into the respective sites, it's less traffic. Here, as you can see, it's only 200 items loading at a time, as opposed to 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000.
So I'm guessing that means quicker to load, quicker to search, right?
Quicker to search, quicker to load, quicker to work with, better experience all around, and job done.
Excellent, thank you. So, I guess the headline from this section is ignore the Microsoft blurb that says you can have 30 million documents in a library, because libraries build really quickly. If you've got like 4 or 5 staff working in a team, all creating a new document every day, that limit of sort of 5,000 items, that happens relatively quickly, right? So
it can.
And I suppose the other thing is I guess, again, coming back to structure on this, you've come back to our homepage of our hub. This is stuff that we want everybody to see and everybody to know. But then for you as a user in our technical department, you don't care about all of the documents in finance or all the documents in operations or whatever. You can easily find the library of data that we want to point you at, because you're going to spend most of your time working on the technical team sub-site or site, sorry, because that's your department, right? So you know where to quickly find the documents that you want.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, I have a lot of cross-department working as well. So I work closely with our relationship management team. I work closely with the operations team. So if I need to find a document that sits in their areas, I know where to go, as opposed to if everything's just sitting in one place. Because I've seen that where a lot of things as department files, they're on one document library within one folder, and the folder's called general, for example. It's just, then you're just playing cat and mouse trying to find this document. So that's why when it's all split out, it's much easier. So I know I just go to the up site, go to this folder, grab that file, job done. I've done what I needed to do.
Excellent. So let's talk briefly about branding.
My favorite topic.
So again, we know that in SharePoint, you don't have to have it looking fancy like this. It can literally just look like a list of files and folders. A little bit boring, right? So you've given it away. You've given the game away because you've shown the hub, which is obviously fully branded, and you did all of this for us, I know. So in all of our colours. So why go beyond the out of the box SharePoint experience?
I mean, I sound like a broken record, but I'll come back to it. It's user experience. I think that a user opens something in the morning that looks like this and it looks engaging. You want to work with it. My favorite one, and I'm not just saying it because I'm talking to you, Dan, is the People Hub. I mean, the People Hub is my favorite one. I know this is the one that you look after the most. And the reason why it's my favorite one is just, if you just look at it, I mean, the dynamic of it with the imagery or the colors, the branding, how it's laid out, the banners as well. So this Who's Who at Ramsac, now that could have just been a boring title. Just a text box, put it in Who's Who at Ramsac. But we didn't do it that way. So we thought, well, no, let's create an image. Let's use the SharePoint web part of the wide image banner, get it on there, and then the file viewer for our organization chart. And I think that this is
I really like this, and we've taken this to a new level as well. There's 100 people on our organization chart, but if you, I don't mind exposing my own. If you want to click on my face as an example there, Adil, it's a little bit small on the screen, but if you click on my face, it actually takes you to, it's not just an interactive org chart that people can use. It actually links to, this is something we do when everyone starts. We send an email around with some facts about that person, and this is really lovely when you're going into a meeting with somebody that you've not met with before. So just an example of how this has gone beyond just having a boring document library with a link to a PDF.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent.
And I'll come back to it. This is SharePoint. So this is not just something else. This is not something custom. This is SharePoint. And I think that this is where it makes me, I say upset when I hear the negative, like, oh, SharePoint's this, and I'm like, but no, if it's done properly and you use these features, look at what it can be. So yeah,
exactly. And I know one of the things that you fed back to me after your induction week was I was given loads and loads of information, Dan. You know, in my induction with finance, they gave me a link to how to see my electronic pay slips, and you know, in my induction with my team, they gave me a link to how to get onto CRM, and with my induction with people, they told me how to get into Breathe, which is our HR platform. And you had to think to put all of those in your favorites or whatever, and now it's all just there on the homepage, right? So all the commonly used links are all just there.
Commonly used links are all there. And I remember my induction, like you said, it was just horrible in that sense. I mean, no, it was a good induction, I'm not saying, but in terms of the in terms of just the experience of then, you know, having to open this file every day, go for the link, try and favorite it, it was very hard. And I just thought, well, why don't we just put it here? And then that's why they're all here. And it's not just everyday links, it's everyday team resources links as well. So I know Peter won't mind me showing this, but these are all of our daily resources that we use in the technical department. So again, I remember sitting down with the chaps and they showed me their favorites, and it was ridiculous. I mean, there was tabs all across here, all down there. And I said, look, let's get rid of them. Let's put them here. And a lot of the guys now favorited this as their homepage as well. So when they start in the morning, this is what they get. They can grab what they need and they can get on with it.
I know we had that in our support team as well, where, you know, somebody new would start, and how do you make sure that they've got, you know, all the links to all the different suppliers, etc. Okay, let's come on to security if we can, because everything we talk about around Ramsac these days comes back to cybersecurity. So if I've moved all my files and folders away from a server that used to sit securely in my physical server room or behind a firewall, obviously I've opened up a whole new set of risks. So obviously there's some core essential security that we have to put in place, whether that's Microsoft Intune, whether that's you know, device management and enrollment, and definitely multi-factor authentication. I mean, I don't think we would even move clients' files into SharePoint now if the client wasn't using MFA. So they're all kind of essential cybersecurity basics. I'm not going to go into that today because that's a whole other webinar all on its own. But assuming we've got our house in order and we've done all of those things, so we're managing devices and we've got MFA in place and all that kind of thing, we need to what do we need to think about specifically when about SharePoint security, and how we ensure that we know who's got access to what?
So I think that the best thing, or the first thing you should mention, or first thing you should do is the groups. So who needs to sit in what area? So for example, who the HR team is, who's the technical team, who's the finance team, etc. And what I've seen in the past, so if you don't mind, I'll just quickly share a quick example. Everyone was given access to this one area of the department, but it was all single users. So for example, John Smith, Joe Bloggs, etc. And I was like, okay, but where else is it sitting? In a nutshell, look, that's very bad to manage, because if somebody leaves the department, you have to then physically go and remove him from that group, remove him from that site, remove him from that site. Quicker and better way, and the way that we recommend that you do it, is using SharePoint permission groups, which are created in Office 365, which is in here. You put everybody within one group, then you just give that one group access to the SharePoint area. Now, the benefit of doing it that way is if somebody leaves, you just pop them out of the group. That's it. And then that's now managed across everywhere in your tenant. So if that group has been given access to this site or that site, you just remove them from one group, it's done everywhere. And then also adding someone. So if a new starter starts, you add them into the group, they've automatically got access to everywhere in the SharePoint as well.
So you're not physically adding them to document libraries
or document libraries or everywhere else. So that's the best way to manage your permissions. And I think doing it that way is secure as well. So
presumably when you start a project, then you'd sit down with an organization and go, okay, I've got this site, this is the people site, this is the marketing, this is finance, this is operations, this is fundraising, whatever. And then you look at groups of people and go, right, everyone that works in fundraising needs access to fundraising and HR, and but they don't need access to finance. And I guess that's no different to what we used to do when we did file servers and we had sort of home drives, and then we had shared drives and that kind of stuff. So SharePoint, so that's just say that again. So that's SharePoint permission groups, did you say?
Yeah, so SharePoint permission groups.
Excellent. And then I know one of the things you did for me, which, you know, and this is where I really like the very granular way that we can then start to control permissions as well, was, you know, in our you know, in our people hub, for example, I wanted staff to be able to access their own HR folder because under GDPR, it's good practice, right? But you've got to also control.
Yeah.
Only the people that need to see that data need to see it. So I know you got it set for us in the HR hub that, you know, as the HR director, I can see everything, but then team leaders can see only the people that report to them, and then sub teams, and then end users can only see their folder, right?
Yeah.
There was a question that just popped up about is there a limit to the number of permission groups you can have, Adil?
No, you can have as many as you want, but for best practice, keep them as small as possible. But you can have as many as you like.
Now, the other thing I want to talk about is external sharing. So I know that one of the big advantages of SharePoint is that ability to be able to share beyond your own organization, and we all collaborate now. And you know, in our case, for example, with clients that we work with, we'll often have, you know, reports that we're producing for them every month. We've often got maybe briefing sheets or project control documents. We work with a lot of not-for-profit organizations that might have trustees that aren't inside the organization, but they need board papers and stuff like that. So the big advantage of SharePoint compared to the traditional file server is that we can now start sharing things with people that don't work for us.
Yeah.
But there are risks of that too, right?
Yeah, there's massive risks and it needs to be managed correctly. So I've just put on the screen our external sharing site. So again, coming back to our analogy before, this is another bedroom within our house. All the external sharing files, we've put it completely separate to everything else. So, and it's clearly marked, as you can see, clients external, which means this is what we can share externally. Now, by default, I've seen in some cases, if it's not looked at properly, that some configurations have been open to everyone, meaning anything can be shared to everyone, even your internal files. If somebody mistakenly shares it out, it can be done. There are things in place where you can retract that and fix that if that ever happens. So it's not like, oh my God, the world's over. It's not that. We can fix it. But yeah, so this is why it needs to be managed correctly, which ultimately ramsac have.
I know we looked at this on one of the health checks that you did for one of our clients recently, and there's like a top level permission box that can be ticked or unticked, isn't there? Which end users would never see. It's done like in the admin portal of 365, but we went into a client and they were not an insignificant size organization. And as I recall, they'd got it set so that anybody in the organization could share a link. Oh, there you go. You've got it there. That most permissive setting. So what does that mean, that most permissive setting?
So the most permissive setting is literally what it says there. Users can share files with folders using links that don't require a sign-in as well.
So the real danger there is you have completely opened up your estate. So you know, I might be on a call with you, you know, with a client today, and I share a link to that file. Once I've shared that hyperlink, it is out of my control, right? So that person I've shared it with can just forward that hyperlink to 100 friends if they want to, and those 100 people have also got access to everything within that file or any folders. Sorry, within that folder or any subfolders that we put in. So that really is leaving the front door wide open, isn't it?
Pretty much. But then if you do it correctly and you manage it correctly, it can be fixed. So meaning you do the correct practices, which is what we've got here. So literally we've got I'll just quickly break down the settings if that's all right, Dan.
Yeah, please.
So we've got it set as new and existing guests. So they must provide a verification code as well. So that's a bit of a security there. And it also says down here that you can only share with people within the organization. However, so even though this is our configuration settings at the top level, you can then configure your site level as well, if that makes sense. So any additional sites that we create now will automatically inherit these settings, that's what you want. So you want to keep all that protected. But our client site, which I've just showed to everyone here, this is shared. This is configured to be able to be shared externally. So this is a separate one that has its own set of configuration settings. I thought that's quite key to mention to everybody on the call today, to let everybody know that although you can set it at the top level to protect everything else and the integrity of everything else, what's created new, whatever you already have, they can have specific settings, which is what we have. And then
so just to summarize that, so the top level, going back, this is where we go back to our main site and then all the sub sites that you've created. Top level internally at ramsac, documents can only be shared by people that are accredited by ramsac. But then we've created an entirely separate site called Clients External, and that is the site where we stick anything that we want to share with a specific customer. So we can share that folder.
And they have access to. So that's probably another one. So they have access to their folder, which is sitting in their respective area here, and they can only see their own. So yeah, each client can come in and view their client folder. They can't see anybody else's, protecting everything as well.
Yeah. And I think, this is this whole GDPR thing about making sure that, only people that are supposed to access a set of documents can access that set of documents.
Yeah.
And when you do a health check when you run one of our SharePoint health checks, am I right in thinking that the reports that you run that expose the level of sharing that's already in place? So you can sit down with the client and say, did you know that, Bill in finance is sharing a folder with the accountants, which might be entirely appropriate, but did you also know that, John in HR is actually sharing a set of files with, his home email address, or with your main competitor down the road, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, so in Microsoft Security and Compliance Center, we could run an audit. So that's what we're running in our health check, is running an audit of what files have been shared and who they've been shared with, and we can give that to the client to say, look, these are the files that have been shared. And what you just said, point out where we think that there's a grey flag, or there's a red flag, I should say, where there's a red flag against it, and make the client aware of that. So that's one thing.
I think it's important as well, isn't it, that if people forget sometimes that if they share a folder, you're sharing everything. That's then at a later point put in that folder. And that's why we have that separate client external thing, so that if you're putting a file in there, it's really obvious that you're putting a file in there that you're happy that a client could see at any point down the road, versus something that you might consider confidential that you wouldn't share.
Exactly. And it comes back to what we mentioned at the start, structure. So creating the structure correct. So this way we've just allowed even our colleagues to have that confidence to say, yeah, look, if you need to share something, this is the place to do it. If something is sitting within our other site collections, it's fine. It just means that you pick that file up, you drop it into where it needs to go into here, file it accordingly, and then you can share it external. So it's also giving the users the confidence to be able to do it. And I keep going back to it, user confidence and user experience. That's the key for SharePoint.
Well, it's that fact that it prompts you to think, doesn't it? If I go and share something from the HR site, for example, the fact that I can't just do it immediately, it makes me really savage to share. Why am I sharing this again? And is that right? And then if it is, brilliant, I then have a conversation with you and we set up the right sharing permissions. But so sharing fundamentally good. We're in a collaborative world, particularly post-COVID. So use SharePoint for what it's for, but don't let it go unchecked, I think is probably what you're saying here, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So we talked about sharing. Are there any other quick security tips within SharePoint itself that you think people need to think about?
Just quick ones. So, I mean, I'd say locking personal devices. I think that's very key. I mean, when you're walking away, how many times do we do this? Like you're in the office setting and you think, oh, I just need to pop over to the kitchen to grab a drink. You leave your laptop completely open. These things can happen. Anything can happen within the organization. So just about keeping yourself safe and secure, lock your laptop. Using strong passwords. The amount of times I hear a joke in conversations that, oh, I use the same password for everything. And then I always think, well, is that really good? I mean, I don't think so. But using strong passwords to keep everything secure as well is good. And then quick ones in terms of external sharing, set a password for external sharing as well. So when you're sharing a link, SharePoint gives you an option to say, would you like to set a password? Set a strong password, and then share that password specifically with the client or with whoever you're sharing it with. And that way it's all secure. And then having a good backup in place as well, which Dan, I know we have a really good one that we offer to our clients as well. So yeah, having a good backup of everything is very key.
Yeah, I think that's important because there's loads of built-in kind of ability to go back in different versions of SharePoint, aren't there? So I mean, one of the things I love is that time that you open a document thinking you've opened it as a template, but you haven't, and suddenly you've edited it and you changed the template for everybody. I love the fact that you can just go back and restore
restore a version control,
small name, whatever.
Yeah.
But people confuse that with backup, don't they? And they think that's backup, and it's not, right? Because that's still everything all within SharePoint. So we always recommend a third-party sort of cloud backup, so that you've not got everything sat in one basket. And that's just the classic, going back to when we had a server, you backed up to tape and then you took the tape away from the building so that there was an air gap between those two sources of information. And I think people don't think that they have to do that in SharePoint, but it's definitely always our recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're ploughing through our time. So I'm going to move on to OneDrive. I know that one of the things that some users struggle with is that quick file browsing and the ability to quickly attach commonly used files or perhaps work on commonly used files offline. You know, they're working on a train with no signal. Um, Talk to us about the OneDrive sync tool, because I know that can be the answer to a lot of people's headaches, can't it?
It can, and it's also the answer to people's headaches as well if it's not good, if it's not done correctly. So OneDrive, I love OneDrive Sync Engine. I think when it's used correctly, it's a very powerful tool to use. Common mistakes I see is as soon as people think, oh, I can have this in my file explorer, I don't need to go to the browser, I can get to what I need. They sync everything. Now, the challenge with this is what we've just said of loading times. So if something has been updated, so for example, I'll just quickly touch on, I don't do nothing with finance, right? Where I sit, I don't do nothing with them. Why would I sync their files down? There's no reason for it, right? However, people do it just because, oh, it's there, it's easy for me to get to. Now, what that means is finance are obviously within their folders, working every single day, doing what they need to do, uploading and updating files. My sync engine is constantly running then. It's trying to bring me the latest version of those files constantly, which what's the result of that? Impacts performance on your laptop. So it impacts everything. Now, that's the point where I say to a lot of clients in discussions, you don't need to sync everything, sync what you're using. So that's my number one tool, one key for the tool is that. And also know the differences between the statuses. So a lot of people, they see the status column and how it's updating from a green tick to a blue icon or a red cross, and what do they all mean? We've got a really good article actually from Microsoft official guidance explains all that, and I'm sure we can share that out at the end so everybody can have a breakdown of what those mean.
I'll put that in at the end. So this, just to summarize on this OneDrive sync. So this is effectively the ability. So I use this. So OneDrive is installed on my local laptop. I happen to use a MacBook, but so it doesn't matter. It's cross-platform, but it gives me that synchronous. I go into SharePoint and I select in SharePoint the folders that I use all the time, and it gives me that synchronous link back to. For those of us that are old enough to remember, I think of this as being like the old My Briefcase in some of the very early versions of Windows. But it basically means I can work offline on a document on my laptop without even going near the hub. And then when I get back online, it just synchronizes the latest version of the changes. So, so that's essentially what OneDrive Sync is, right?
Yeah, sorry, when I was speaking, I was talking about the scary part, which I always do start. But the positive is what you've just said. So if you sync down what you wanted to use and that's your set of files, you can use it offline. You crack on, do what you need to do on the train, like you said. And then as soon as you get an internet connection, it will sync back up. So that's a very good benefit of using it.
Yeah, so the watchword there is, because again, you know, it's if you've got several terabyte of data in your SharePoint, because this is the organization-wide SharePoint site, you definitely don't want to synchronize all of that data with your local laptop, because I can pretty much guarantee that your local laptop has a smaller hard drive than your SharePoint site does. So for me, I've just got 3 or 4 folders that I know I work on all the time, and I synchronize that, and I find that really useful. One of the things that people sometimes struggle with, and I know we'll talk about user training, but one of the things that the things that people don't like out of the box about SharePoint is how sometimes it can feel a bit more complicated to attach files to an email, for example. But where you've got that local OneDrive sync tool in place, and as you say, I will share the link at the end of this call for a bit of information on how that works. I actually don't have to worry about browsing SharePoint. I can it just feels like I'm browsing my normal local folders. I can attach a document to an email really quickly. And for me, that was quite a game changer, I think.
And it's a game changer for a lot of clients that we've done this for as well. So yeah, it's literally as simple as that. Once you've synced down what you physically need, you do your email, go to attaching, you're just browsing as normal, you attach it and job done. That's it.
Yeah. But again, don't synchronize the whole site.
Yeah, don't sync everything.
Much bigger than even my well-spec'd MacBook would ever be able to cope with. Excellent. So, and then on that article that we're going to share, I'll share it towards the end of the call so that we don't lose you all to browsing the Microsoft site. I know it talks about how to look at the little synchronizing icons so you can see what is live synchronizing. But I know that's been something you've seen causing problems when you've done health checks where people have been complaining that things have been running slowly.
Yeah. And the main reason is what we've just said. They've synced everything, and also they've used the wrong syncing. So SharePoint has two options. You have a sync, which is what I recommend everyone using, and there's another one that says add shortcut to OneDrive, which then adding the shortcut, both essentially should do the same thing, but one just, in my experience of using SharePoint Online and training users for about 8 years now, it works better when you just use the sync. So I've had a few clients who've had the same problems. We've reverted from one to the other, and they've seen good results, and that's working fine. So it's just to put that out there for people as well.
Excellent, thank you. So the final point we're going to move on to, just before we then open up to any remaining questions, is SharePoint training. So I know you're passionate about training.
I am.
And I know I'm not a techie, and from my own perspective, actually we only needed an hour or two, but you sat down and you gave me confidence and knowledge to be effective at making most of the day-to-day changes in SharePoint that I needed. So what's your view on how to best approach training?
So best way I would say is, first of all, like you've just touched on there, identify key users in the organization. So Dan, you're a key user for us in the organization, so we trained you. I think when I tell clients this during my discussion date, that's where the game changes, where I say, here's our hub site. They look at it and they all think, oh, I've done this and I keep this up to date. I say, yeah, I built it, but I haven't kept this up to date. This is due to the user training. So this is like yourself, Dan, and other key users who have gone in, create all the beautiful comms to go out. And that's where users are like, oh, actually, then I've got the confidence to do this, so we can do it. And that's the main thing. So identifying key users, train them on how to do day-to-day activities like this. And then also just to explain the difference between everything. So a lot of people, Teams, what's Teams, how should Teams be used, what is OneDrive, which you just touched on, what is SharePoint, and how they all work together. I think trying to give the user awareness of all this and how it all ties together and how it all works and what's best practice for one over the other, I think that's quite key for people's knowledge then to then make that decision, like, okay, where do I store my file? Do I store it on the SharePoint side, or do I put it in my project Teams channel? Or, okay, how do I sync, or how do I do the attachment of, from my OneDrive to the email? I think if users are trained correctly and made aware of how this all works and ties in together, then it goes a long way in keeping everyone happy, I would say. And I think these are massive areas. And I've seen that when I go in to do training, I ask users, okay, like, do you know about SharePoint? No, I don't know what it is. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. And then it just makes you quite upset to see that people are having such bad user experience with everything. And it's all simple. No one taking the time to sit with them for about, like you said, 45 minutes to an hour just to explain how it all works and pass that knowledge on. And that's one thing that I love to do. And I think that in every project that I've ran, I always urge the client, let's put training in, which we always do. So we always do training that runs for like a day or something, and then it all works very well.
Yeah, and I think, as I say, you don't have to be a techie to know how to do this. And
no.
Again, the hub is in front of everybody, which is our internal site. We barely looked at document libraries on here, and which is what everyone thinks SharePoint is. Everyone thinks it's where the files are stored. All our files, we don't have a file server. All our files are in here somewhere, but that's almost like the least interesting bit of SharePoint. If I just look at this page, the home page that you've landed on, you can see this is all of our internal news. That has massively reduced the amount of all company emails that we send, which is a big win. And I can tell you that at least 2 of those articles have been put on this morning. That women's health article, I think Hayley has posted this morning. The best companies to work for is an article I wrote this morning. 24-hour gaming, which was an event that happened in Ramsac Towers this weekend, that went up yesterday. You've not done any of that, right? You just built the site.
I built the site, given the training, and everyone else has just gone on and done it. And that's why I love it, because when I log in the morning and I see all these new articles, and I just think to myself, like, it's changing every day, which people have new things to look at every single day as well, which keeps our users engaged and also gives me the, what makes me happy that I've trained everyone and everyone goes ahead and does this. And I only get involved in something breaks, like when you broke permissions, Dan.
I might have done.
So then that's when I get involved and just fix things. And I mean, jokes aside, in the 2 years I've been here, I've only probably had to fix things twice.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's great to see.
And I think particularly, post-COVID, I mean, this kind of communication type site within SharePoint, what I love about SharePoint is, yes, all my files and folders are in there. So it doesn't make any difference. I'm working from home today. It doesn't make any difference whether I'm working from home, whether I'm working from the train, or whether I'm working from the office. I've got the same access to all my files and folders. But also, because we're all hybrid working, this kind of communication site at the front end of SharePoint has become so important to comms and culture, and and I know you've set up a little tool that on a Friday sends an email around to everybody for the articles that they might have missed. So we make sure that people still get that. But I get one email a week instead of 7, 8, 9 internal emails, all at ramsac type emails. So I think it's made a massive difference. So thanks. So those were the points we wanted to sort of go through around sort of structure, branding, security, OneDrive sync, and that sort of training piece. I'm just going to bring you back into the spotlight. If people have got any questions, we're more than happy to take them at this point. Elaine, thank you. You put a great top tip in the chat. I noticed there. Don't synchronize subfolders alone unless people are 100% sure they won't need anything else in that folder. If people sync a subfolder and then later try to sync the top level folder, it breaks the sync. And don't worry, Elaine, we won't ask you how you know. But that's really useful little top tip there. So let me just feel free to sort of raise your hands or to pop a question in the chat if you want to. Jasmine Brand, I can see we've got a question.
Hi, that was great, very helpful, thank you. How does something that confuses me all the time is how SharePoint then interacts with Teams, because we're not very tech savvy on this end. We're trying to get our head around SharePoint, and what we've got is people using Teams, using SharePoint, and I know that there is a link there, but no one really understands what the link is.
Okay, so I'm going to try and keep this quick but informative at the same time. So essentially, Teams is SharePoint. Okay, so behind in a Teams channel where you see the files tab where people go and upload their files, that is a document library that sits at the back of SharePoint. Now, although it is SharePoint, I always say to people, actual SharePoint, which is what you've seen today, should be used to store your main files. Okay, I mean, this is going to sound wrong or sound bad, but meaning your main, actual, serious, important files. Those should be within actual SharePoint structure. Teams should be stood up for quick projects, right? And then I'm going to give you a quick way of working. So what you could do is you could have a SharePoint site that's called projects. Within that, you have your document libraries for each project. You stand up a Teams channel, attach that document library to the Teams. Now that Teams is being used for the comms. Oh, hi, look, there's a client call with X, Y, and Z today, or can you upload or, sort this document out, etc., blah, blah, blah. But then at the end of the project, you can close down the Teams, but the files are fine. Now, the problem you have is if you put everything within one Teams channel, it's hard to then close those Teams down to keep a nice clean house. And then what do you do with the files? So that's where I always say to people, use SharePoint for the means of storing all your main files, and just use Teams for just quick standing up for quick projects and just have it for your communications. That's the best way to do it.
And it's worth saying as well that within Teams, as well as just having the built-in little document library that sits in Teams, you can also add a SharePoint tab to the top. So, for example, in our marketing team on Teams, we have a tab at the top, which is a link to all of our marketing documents. It's actually not using that sort of that Teams folder. It's actually linking directly back to that marketing subsite. So that's the way we use it as well. There's a question from Gordon about how easy is it to set up a SharePoint intranet. I've seen templates on Microsoft. Are these okay to use?
They are okay to use. And then you can just customize them as you go along to make it more fit for your organization. So you can use them. But I would always say before doing any SharePoint intranet, if you want to quickly stand them up, that's fine, but I would say go through the process of speaking to the users first to see what the users need, where they're struggling with, what the challenges, and then you can then apply that template, and then you can then just chop and change it as you need to do it.
Lovely, thank you. There's a hand up from Joanna.
Hi, thank you for everything. I just had a quick question. We are trying to use also a Teams site for external sharing, and I was wondering whether we can have a way to have the files that we use in our normal hub just some of them to be synced with the team side so that we don't have to have duplicate files in both places? Is that something we can do?
It's something you can do, but then what you're doing is you're tinkering with settings on both areas, and then it comes down to making the users aware that, okay, this area now is open for external sharing as well. Please share what you need to share only. And then it comes down to, with all due respect, do you trust your users? And if you trust the users, great. If not, I mean, my biggest recommendation would be to that is, it's going to be an easy, simple thing. Just keep everything in one place. Everything that you need to do for external sharing, just put it in one place. Keep that area configured correctly, and everything else is locked down and, you know, configured securely. That way your users have confidence, you also have the confidence, and if something needs to be recovered, it's easy, can be recovered as well.
And I kind of think of it as like, I mean, it's down to how sensitive the stuff is that you're sharing. I kind of think of the stuff I share on Teams is the stuff that I would also share on email. So if it's the, you know, if it's the stuff I'm happy that once it's out of my control, it's not going to cause any problems for anybody. You know, if I'd have attached it to an email previously, I'll do that in a Teams chat. Whereas if I've got like a big centralized document control, a project control document, for example, I think that's where I would say that's always going to live in SharePoint. Hopefully that helps. I've got time for one more question. I think Kate has got a hand up.
Hi, thank you. So my question, we have a SharePoint site. It's not as beautiful as the ramsac SharePoint site.
Thank you.
So I guess, and I think that might be true of a few people here. I guess the question is, you know, if we're thinking about improving where next, how to build this out and make it more. So we're on quite a flat file structure at the moment. It's done in document libraries and we've got permission group structure around it, but we don't have the sort of comms intranet front end on it. So what's the thinking that needs to happen internally, kind of to get us there? I know that's a really tough question, sorry. And then I guess, you know, if we were gonna, what's the first stages of coming to ramsac to get help and support with that? And I guess you, Adil.
Okay, I mean, I think for the second part of your question, that's probably for Dan to answer. But I'll answer the first bit. And I think, sorry, there was a lot of background noise from where you was. And I think I understood that you said that you wanted to move from this simple structure you got to a more elegant and nicely looking intranet. Was that okay? It's quite simple to do. It just means that we can make this nice intranet for you. But it's just about how you want to tackle the file structure. So if the file structure, you want to then dynamically link it, that means that you can keep the files exactly where they are, and we just focus more on the dynamism of the intranet. However, if you wanted to put the file structure exactly as it is, but with a nice intranet, you then have to do a migration project. So we then have to migrate from one SharePoint site to the new SharePoint site. We have a tool called ShareGate that can assist us in helping you to do that. And then that's how we can do that. So to answer your question, it can be done. It's not that, oh my God, we've lost the opportunity. No, you haven't lost the opportunity. It can be done.
And the starting point with Adil is what most organisations do is they have a bit of we call it an art of the possible workshop, where Adil will literally just come in for a couple of hours, sit down, show the sort of things that we've done both on our hub site and we've done, you know, Adil's done very different types of sites for different organisations. And then and I think the thing is, it's really important that it's not the IT people that are in that meeting solely. I think, you know, you want representatives from around the organisation, because marketing people will have a view, finance people will have a view of what they would like, you know, HR people will want a view. So that kind of art of the possible workshop normally ends up with a great big spider diagram of these are all the things we'd like and how we build it out, and then the stages perhaps that we build it into. I'm conscious, I'm very conscious that I've got 3 minutes left to round up, and there's a couple of questions I've just seen in the chat window that we haven't got to. Sean, a very quick answer to your question about thumbnail images. Yes, I know that's something that Adil is really passionate about in terms of having nice thumbnails and branded images and shortcuts. So yeah, that's definitely all possible. I think there was a question around, I don't know whether you can answer this in 30 seconds, Adil.
I'll try.
Around following Elaine's top tip, how do people approach syncing the parent folder after having synced a subfolder? So that, you know, overcoming Elaine's, is it a case of unsyncing the subfolder first and then starting at the top level?
Yeah, pretty much. So what I would do is I'd unsync everything first, make sure the status column has gone from a blue or a green tick to a no tick or no icon, sorry. Remove everything from your laptop, and then safely go back and sync what you need. That I'm a big believer of just starting again as opposed in that scenario, because I know there's other ways that people try to fix the problem straight away with other things, but I've just found that it just messes up a lot of other areas and a lot of other syncing. Best way is just start again, unsync everything, remove it off, and really just resync everything again.
And then you know what you've got.
You know what
Brilliant.
you've got.
We're happy to carrying on after the end. I've got a minute of just a little bit of housekeeping I want to wrap up with, but I did say I'd finish at 12, so I will. But we'll leave the chat window open. So if you've got stuff after the call that you want to ask Adil while you've got him, that's fine. Just thanks, Adil. That's been brilliant to be in chat with you today. There was a question in the chat from James who asked whether Adil is able to just do a SharePoint health check or whether ramsac health checks have to look at the entire organization. Thank you, James. That leads in very nicely without me wanting to sales pitch into the fact that yes, Adil operates a SharePoint only health check. We don't let you loose on anything beyond SharePoint, do we, Adil? So as well as the traditional sort of IT system and security health checks that we offer, we do have a standalone SharePoint health check where Adil will come in and he'll spend half a day just going through your site setup and do a kind of a red, amber, green type report of the things that he thinks will make it either more secure or more efficient. And that links in nicely. It's a standalone health check. It's going to cost £500. In a minute, you're going to get from Lou a survey link just to ask for some feedback on what you thought about this morning's session. And there is a tick box in there. If you want more information about the SharePoint health check, just tick that and one of us will be in touch. We will send the recording of today out as well. I think we could have gone on for another hour. So so thanks, Adil, very much for your time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. It was wonderful to have so many of you on the call with us today. It is 12 o'clock, so I am going to wrap things up. But we are around. I've just popped my email address in the chat window. Many of you are ramsac clients and you'll have your relationship manager contact details as well. If you've got more questions, if you want to arrange a Teams call initially with Adil, just to, with no obligation, just talk about the art of what might be possible, then we were happy to book that in for Adil as well. But thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.